Hi guys, here is a quick demo on setting up Cloudera Quickstart VM in case you are interested in working on a standalone cluster. You can download the Cloudera Quickstart VM. So you can just type in download Cloudera Quickstart VM and you can search for package. Now this can be used to set up a Quickstart VM, which would be a single node Cloudera based cluster. So you can click on this link and then basically based on the platform which you would be choosing to install, such as using a VM box or which version of Cloudera you would install. So here I can select a platform, so I can choose VirtualBox and then you can click on get it now. So give your details and basically then it should allow you to download the Quick Start VM, which would look something like this. And once you have the zip file which is downloaded, you can unzip it, which can then be used to set up a single node Cloudera cluster. So once you have downloaded the zip file, that would look something like this. So you would have a Quick Start VirtualBox and then a VirtualBox disk. Now this can be used to set up a cluster. Ignore these files which are related to Amazon machines and you don't need to have that. So you would just have this and this can be used to set up a Cloudera cluster. So for this to be set up, you can click on File, Import Appliance, and here you can choose your Quick Start VM by looking into Downloads, Quick Start VM, select this and click on Open. Now you can click on Next and that shows you the specifications of CPU, RAM, which we can then change later, and click on Import. This will start importing virtual disk image .vmdk file into your VM box. Once this is done, we will have to change the specifications of our machines to use 2 CPU cores minimum and give a little more RAM, because Cloudera Quickstart VM is very CPU intensive and it needs good amount of RAM. So to survive, I will give 2 CPU cores and 5 GB RAM, and that should be enough for us to bring up a Quick Start VM, which gives us a Cloudera distribution of Hadoop in a single node cluster setup, which can be used for working, learning about different distributions in Cloudera cluster, working with HDFS and other Hadoop ecosystem components. Let's just wait for this importing to finish and then we will go ahead and set up a Quick Start VM for our practice. Here the importing of appliance is done and we see Cloudera Quick Start machine is added to my list of machines. I can click on this and click on settings. As mentioned, I would like to give it more RAM and more CPU cores. So click on system and here let's increase the RAM to at least 5 and click on processor and let's give it 2 CPU cores, which would at least be better than using 1 CPU core. Network, it goes for NAT and that's fine. Click on OK and we would want to start this machine so that it uses 2 CPU cores, 5 GB RAM, and it should bring up my Cloudera Quick Start VM. Now let's go ahead and start this machine, which has our Quick Start VM. It might take initially some time to start up because internally there will be various Cloudera services which will be starting up, and those services need to be up for our Cloudera Quick Start VM to be accessible. So unlike your Apache Hadoop cluster, where we start our cluster and we will be starting all our processes, in case of Cloudera, it is your Cloudera SCM server and agents which take care of starting up of your services and starting up of your different roles for those services. I explained in my previous session that for a Cloudera cluster, it would be these services. Let me just show you that. So in case of Apache cluster, we start our services, that is, we start our cluster by running script, and then basically those scripts will individually start the different processes on different nodes. In case of Cloudera, we would always have a Cloudera SCM server which would be running on one machine, and then including that machine we would have Cloudera SCM agents which would be running on multiple machines. Similarly, if we had a Hortonworks cluster, we would have Ambari server starting up on the first machine and then Ambari agents running on other machines. So your server component knows what are the services which are set up, what are their configurations, and agents running on every node are responsible to send heartbeats to the server, receive instructions, and then take care of starting and stopping up of individual roles on different machines. In case of our single node cluster setup in Quickstart VM, we would just have one SCM server and one SCM agent which will start on the machine, which will then take care of all the roles which need to be started for your different services. So we will just wait for our machine to come up and basically have Cloudera SCM server and agent running. And once we have that, we need to follow few steps so that we can have the Cloudera admin console accessible, which allows you to browse the cluster, look at different services, look at the roles for different services, and also work with your cluster either using command line or using the web interface, that is Hue. Now that my machine has come up and it already is connected to the internet, which we can see here, we need to do certain things so that we can have our admin console accessible. At this point of time, you can click on terminal and check if you have access to the cluster. So here type in host name and that shows you your host name, which is quickstart.cloudera. We can also type in HDFS command to see if we have access and if my cluster is working. These commands are same as you would give them in a Apache Hadoop cluster or in any other distribution of Hadoop. Sometimes when your cluster is up and you have access to the terminal, it might take few seconds or few minutes before there is a connection established between Cloudera SCM server and Cloudera SCM agent running in the background, which takes care of your cluster. I have given HDFS DFS list command, which basically should show me what by default exists on my HDFS. Let's just give it a couple of seconds before it shows us the output. We can also check by giving a service Cloudera SCM server status, and here it tells me that if you would want to use Cloudera Express free, run this command. It needs 8 GB of RAM and at least 2 virtual CPU cores. And it also mentions it may take several minutes before Cloudera Manager has started. I can log in as root here and then give the command service Cloudera SCM server status. Remember, the password for root is Cloudera. So it basically says that if you would want to check these settings, it is good to have Express Edition running. So we can close this. My SDFS access is working fine. Let's close the terminal, and here we have launch Cloudera Express. Click on this and that will give you that you need to give a command which is force. Let's copy this command. Let's open a different terminal and let's give this command like this, which will then go ahead and shut down your Cloudera based services, and then it will restart it, only after which you will be able to access your admin console. So let's just give it a couple of minutes before it does this, and then we will have access to our admin console. Here if you see, it is starting the Cloudera Manager server again. It is waiting for Cloudera Manager API, then starting the Cloudera Manager agents, and then configuring the deployment as per the new settings which we have given as to use the Express edition of Cloudera. Once all this is done, it will say the cluster has been restarted and the admin console can be accessed by ID and password as Cloudera. We'll give it a couple of more minutes, and once this is done, we are ready to use our admin console. Now that deployment has been configured, client configurations have also been deployed, and it has restarted the Cloudera management service, it gives you an access to Quickstart admin console using username and password as Cloudera. Let's try accessing it. So we can open up the browser here and let's change this to 7180. That's the default port, and that shows the admin console which is coming up. Now here we can log in as Cloudera, and then Let's click on login. Now, as I said, Cloudera is very CPU intensive and memory intensive, so it would slow down since we have not given enough GB RAM to our Cloudera cluster, and thus it will be advisable to stop or even remove the services which we don't need. Now, as of now, if we look at the services, all of them look in a stop status, and that's good in one way because we can then go ahead and remove the services which we will not use in the beginning, and later we can anytime add services to the cluster. So for example, I can click on key value store here, and then I can scroll down where it says delete to remove this service from the admin console. Now, anytime you're removing a particular service, it will only remove the service from the management by Cloudera Manager. All the role groups under this service will be removed from host templates. So we can click on delete. Now, if this service was depending on some other service, it would have prompted me with a message that remove the relevant services on which this particular service depends. If the service was already running, then it would have given me a message that the service has to be stopped before it can be deleted from the Cloudera admin console. Now, this is my admin console, which allows you to click on services, look at the different roles and processes which are running for this service. We anyways have access to our Cloudera cluster from the terminal using our regular HDFS or yarn or MapRed commands. Now I removed a service. I will also remove Solar, which we will not be using for the beginning, but then it depends on your choice. So we can here scroll down to delete it, and that says that before deleting the Solar service, you must remove the dependencies on this service from the configuration of following services, that is Hue. Now Hue is a web interface which allows you to work with your SDFS, and that is depending on this. So click on configure service dependency, and here we can make sure that our Hue service does not depend on a particular service we are removing, so that then we can have a clean removal of the service. So I'll click on none and I will say save changes. Once this is done, then we can go ahead and try removing the Solar service from our admin console, which will reduce some load on my management console, which will also allow me to work faster on my cluster. Now here we have removed the dependency of Hue on Solar, so we can click on this and then we can delete it. Remember, I'm only doing this so that my cluster becomes a little lighter and I can work on my focus services. At any point of time, if you want to add more services to your cluster, you can anytime do that. You can fix different configuration issues like what we see here with different warning messages. And here we have these services which are already existing. Now if we don't need any of the service, I can click on the drop down and click on delete. Again, this says that Scoop 2 also has relevance to Hue. So Hue as a web interface also depends on Scoop 2. As of now, we'll make it none. At any point of time later, you can add the services by clicking the add service option. Now this is a cluster to which you have admin access, and this is a Quickstart VM which gives you a single node Cloudera cluster which you can use for learning and practicing. So here we'll click on Scoop 2 and then we will say delete, as we have configured the dependency now, and we will remove Scoop 2 also from the list of services which your admin console is managing, right? So once this is done, we have removed 3 services which we did not need. We can even remove Scoop as a client, and if we need, we can add that later. Now there are various other alerts which your Cloudera admin console shows, and we can always fix them by clicking on the health issues or configuration issues. We can click here and see what is the health issue it is pointing to, if that is a critical one or if that can be ignored. So it says there is an issue with a clock offset, which basically relates to an NTP service, network time protocol, which makes sure that one or multiple machines are in the same time zone and are in sync. So for now, we can click on suppress and we can just say suppress for all hosts, and we can say look into it later and confirm. So now we will not have that health issue reported, that probably the NTP service and the machines might not be in sync. Now that does not have an impact for our use case as of now, but if we have a Kerberos kind of setup which is for security, then basically this offset and time zone becomes important. So we can ignore this message and we are still good to use the cluster. We also have other configuration issues, and you can click on this, which might talk about the heap size or the RAM which is available for machines. It talks about Zookeeper should be in odd numbers. Hue does not have a load balancer. HDFS only has one data node. But all of these issues are not to be worried upon because this is a single node cluster setup. So if you want to avoid all of these warnings, you can always click on suppress and you can avoid and let your cluster be in all green status. But that's nothing to worry. So we can click on cluster and basically we can look at the services. So we have removed some services which we don't intend to use now. I have also suppressed a offset warning, which is not very critical for my use case, and basically I'm good to start the cluster. At any point of time, as I said, if you would want to add services, this is the actions button which you can use to add service. So we will just say restart my cluster, which will restart all the services one by one, starting from Zookeeper as the first service to come up. We can always click on this arrow mark and see what is happening in the services, what services are coming up and in which order. If you have any issues, you can always click on the link next to it, which will take you to the logs, and we can click on close to let it happen in the background. So this will basically let my services restart one by one, and my cluster will then become completely accessible either using Hue as a web interface or Quickstart terminal, which allows you to give your commands. Now while my machines are coming up, you can click on hosts and you can have a look at all the hosts we have. As of now only one, which will also tell you how many roles or processes are running on this machine. So that is 25 roles. It tells you what is the disk usage. It tells you what is the physical memory being used. And using this host tab, we can add new hosts to the cluster. We can check the configuration. We can check all the hosts. In diagnostics, you can look at the logs, which will give you access to all the logs. You can even select the sources from which you would want to have the logs, or you can give the host name. You can click on search. You can build your own charts. You can also do the admin stuff by adding different users or enabling security using the administration tab. So since we have clicked on restart of a cluster, we will slowly start seeing all the services one by one coming up, starting with Zookeeper to begin with. And once we have our cluster up and running, whether that is showing all services in green or in a different status, we still should be able to access the service. Now, as we saw in Apache Hadoop cluster, even here we can click on HDFS and we can access the web UI once our HDFS service is up by clicking on quick links. So the service is not yet up. Once it is up, we should be able to see the web UI link, which will allow you to check things from HDFS web interface. Similarly, Yarn as a service also has a web interface. So as soon as the service comes up, under your quick links, we will have access to the Yarn UI. And similarly, once the service comes up, we will have access to Hue, which will give you the web interface, which allows you to work with your HDFS, which allows you to work with your different other components within the cluster without even using the command line tools or command line options. So we will have to give it some time while the Cloudera SCM agent on every machine will be able to restart the roles which are responsible for your cluster to come up. We can always click here, which tells that there are some running commands in the background which are trying to start my cluster. We can go to the terminal and we can switch as HDFS user. Remember, HDFS user is the admin user and it does not have a password unless you have set one. So you can just log in as HDFS, which might ask you for a password initially, which we do not have. So the best way to do this is by logging in as root, where the password is Cloudera, and then you can log in as HDFS, so that then onwards you can give your HDFS commands to work with your file system. Now, since my services are coming up right now, when I try to give a HDFS DFS command, it might not work, or it might also say that it is trying to connect to the name node, which is not up yet. So we will have to give it some time, and only once the name node is up, we will be able to access our HDFS using commands. So this is how you can quickly set up your quick start, and then you can be working using the command line options from the terminal, like what you would do in an Apache Hadoop cluster. You could use the web interfaces which allow you to work with your cluster. Now this usually takes more time, so you will have to give it some time before your services are up and running. And for any reason, if you have issues, it might require you to restart your cluster several times in the beginning before it gets accustomed to the settings what you have given and it starts up the services. At any point of time, if you have any error message, then you can always go back and look in logs and see what is happening and try starting your cluster. So this is how we set up a Quickstart VM, and you can be using this to work with your Cloudera cluster. So thank you and keep learning.
Hi there, if you like this video, subscribe to the Simplilearn YouTube channel and click here to watch similar videos. To nerd up and get certified, click here.